podcast is provided for informational and educational purposes only and should not be construed as legal advice. Because every situation is unique, you should consult with a qualified legal professional for advice specific to your circumstances. If you need legal guidance, please reach out to an accredited attorney or contact us to schedule a consultation. Hello, and welcome back to the Veteran Benefits Podcast. I'm your host, Rebecca Deming. Today we have a special guest, Dan Jarvis. I'm very excited that he's agreed to join us here today. He is the founder of 22-0 and more recently Healing the Hero, which are two organizations that focus on PTSD, but I don't want to get too into the weeds on that because I want to hear the story from your side, Dan. And he's also a Army combat vet, but comes from a family of Navy. So can you tell us a little bit about your background and maybe start by how you decided to go Army when you grew up in a Navy family?
Perfect. I'll start with that story first because it's easy. When I was 17, I graduated high school. And my dad gave me two choices: join the military or start paying rent. And as every 17-year-old knows everything, I'm like, I am not paying rent to live in this house, right? And so I quietly went down to the Army recruiters. I talked to the Army recruiter. It was bouncing back between the Army and the Marine Corps. And so I decided to go Army. And the recruiter had to come to my house to get parental signatures because I was only 17. And when my dad answered the door, he was the nicest person I'd ever seen. And I'm like, who is this guy, right? Let's put it this way. He took it way better than I hoped he would. And that's when I realized, dang it, I should have joined the Marine Corps. But no, I think it was more of an act of defiance to my dad, just being a young kid who thinks they know everything. So then I did the United States Army and went into the infantry, and kind of the rest was history. So
And while you were in, you suffered a traumatic brain injury?
probably more than one. I deployed to Iraq for 15 months, and I also deployed to Afghanistan for 12 months. And in Iraq, definitely had a pretty significant not an IED blast, but a indirect artillery blast. So a 122 millimeter recoilless, or 122 millimeter, kind of like a mortar tube, launched in. The blast hit right on the HESCO barriers. And it was probably about 15, 20 feet away. That's when I had my first face plant, and was pretty dazed, pretty confused. And then Afghanistan was a little bit different. We had airburst RPG right over top of me and two other NCOs, flattened all three of us. And then not too far after that, I stepped on a pressure plate, which detonated an IED on a dismounted patrol less than 10 feet from me. So that one was pretty significant. That one rung my bell really hard. So probably about 4 to 5 IED blasts and explosions.
And then on top of that, while you were deployed, you found out that your mother had a stroke or a heart attack. Is that
Yeah. Right towards the end of my deployment, I got a Red Cross notice, and it's sad and it's a blessing. I actually spoke to my mom that very day. So I was the last person in the family to actually get to talk to her. I was just stuck in Afghanistan, and I had no idea that she was that bad off. And later that evening, she had a massive heart attack, and I had to go home. Red Cross came through, and I was kind of debating, do I stay with my guys? I had about 3 weeks left in Afghanistan, and my first sergeant says, I'm going to make the decision for you. We don't need you. You're going home. So the next day, after I got the notice, I was on a Stryker convoy out and started my trip back to the U.S. And I did not make it home in time to say goodbye, but I was able to attend the funeral. That was pretty difficult.
I can only imagine. And the reason I asked you about that, I think a lot of people, when they think of PTSD, they think it must be combat-related PTSD. It must be the enemy firing at you or getting blown up or something. But, I mean, can you talk a little bit about that trauma as compared to some of the other stuff you were involved in?
So I lost a soldier during that deployment to Afghanistan. So I had some significant trauma, the possibility of getting killed with an IED blast, a lot of the things. And all that's really happening is your nervous system is being primed to respond and react a certain way. I think when my mom passed, that was probably something that kind of set me over the top. And, I didn't get to see her. I mean, the last time I saw her was, on my mid-tour leave. She had gone into the hospital on that leave. So I was always, worried about her because she was not in really good health. And it was just difficult to, not be there when she passed. Everybody got to say their goodbyes, and you're just so far away, you're helpless to do anything. And I just remember that trip home because when I started, she was still alive, right? She was alive for a few days after the heart attack. And I remember a conversation I had with my dad when I was in Kandahar getting ready to fly out. And really, I'm at the mercy of the United States Army. I can't just say, hey, get me home. You got to wait
Right.
for a spot to come open on a military aircraft. You got to fly into Kuwait. Then you got to go from Kuwait to the commercial airport, and then you still got all your equipment, that you're traveling with, your weapon you got to turn in. There's a lot of moving parts. And I'll never forget the conversation with my dad. He was a wreck. And I'd never really seen my dad that way. He's always been, he was a senior chief in the Navy. He's always that hardened guy. He never really showed emotion. And, I'll never forget when he said, you need to hurry. I don't know how long she can hold on. And I said, Dad, I am going as fast as the Army will allow me. And then after that, I was so worked up. I went to a gym and I ran as hard and as fast as I could for about 2 hours on a treadmill. I mean, I'm just trying to blow out all the energy. And after I got off the treadmill, I went back and I called my dad and I'm like, Dad, you've been married to Mom for over 40 years. Don't make me be the reason she suffers. If you're waiting for me to get home and she's struggling, it's okay to let her go. Right. And to this day, I don't know, and I don't know that I want to know. But after I hung up with my dad, I was like, man, I just gave my dad permission to pull the plug. Right. So then there's all this emotion around that. And then, when I got home, I had no comms, I had no cell phone, I had no way of calling anybody. I get to the airport in Tampa, I rent a car and I drive. First place I drive to was the hospital. And when I asked what room she was in, this older gentleman, he was a volunteer, just had this look of like he did not know how to handle that. And I knew what that meant. I meant she was already gone. And I'm like, it's okay. It's not your fault. Don't worry about it. I'll go home. Right. And that's when I went home. And of course, all the family's there and, having to deal with it. And it was okay. Everybody's together. So all the family from out of town comes in and you're being strong. And, we did the funeral service. And next thing I know, I'm heading back to Alaska, and that's when everything kind of came undone. And when I got back boots on the ground, I was having a problem sleeping after my IED blast. So I was kind of a zombie. And first thing I did is I go to a class 6 store and I get a case of beer. Of course, I had no tolerance for alcohol, and by beer number 8, I'm passed out. And then I realized I can sleep now. This is how I'm going to do it. And that just became a routine. I would rinse and repeat, go get off duty, go get some beer, down some beers, pass out. And that was kind of a routine for a good solid, probably almost a good year. And yeah, it was a transition. It was really difficult coming back from combat into that kind of world. So,
Yeah, no, thank you for sharing that. I think losing a parent is hard at
mm,
any stage, but when you're not able to make it home or be there with them, and there's just so much out of your control with being deployed, it completely changes the landscape of dealing with that. So, did you get out of the army shortly after that, or did you serve for a few more years?
there was a couple years after that. I had sustained injuries, obviously, in combat. So I'd had 3 surgeries: left knee, right shoulder, left shoulder. And because I drank so much alcohol, I ended up developing type 2 diabetes. And after my second surgery, the Army says, hey, it's time for you to go. We need a younger, somebody who's healthy that can do this kind of a job. And I get it. I understood that. But the hard part before that, if you back up a little bit, for me, it was March of 2013. I had returned home February of 2011, and by March of 2013, I found myself looking down the barrel of a rifle, and that's when I got to the point where I'm a staff sergeant in the United States Army, so I'm a leader. I'm supposed to be stronger than this. What do I do? Right? I knew I was having problems. I knew the nightmares were pretty intense, the night sweats, the emotional roller coaster ride. It's like a circuit breaker tripping, and then all of a sudden your nervous system is you're feeling everything all at once, and it became so overwhelming. And I'm like, what's wrong with me? I'm supposed to be, this is my second combat tour. I'd already been a police officer, I was a drill sergeant, and here I am, that guy, right? And
Right.
for me, I was like, do I ask for help? And I realized if I command referred, they'd move me back in the barracks, they'd take my guns away, you'd be humiliated, your soldiers wouldn't respect you, your command wouldn't respect you, or that's the self dialogue, that's the self talk, right?
Right.
And that's when suicide became a better option. And that's what a lot of men and women face today is like, we don't want to ask for help, right? Because if we do, we don't want that stigma that's associated with it, right? So for me, it made more sense to just take my own life, and that's scary. That's wrong. But that night,
So what stopped you
so the
from
night
going
I
through with it?
yeah, so the night that I was looking at that rifle and I was like, all right, just one trigger pull and I'm done and pain's over. I heard the kids in the apartment above me running across my ceiling, which was their floor, because I was in a basement apartment outside of Fort Wainwright. And that kind of took me out of that moment. And I realized, man, this can't be I can't hurt a kid. I don't want to hurt one of their parents because a high powered rifle round would have went right through the floor. So I just passed out that night like I did every other night. And the next morning, I got a phone call, and it was Ryan, one of my soldiers, and he's like, Sergeant Jarvis, did you hear about Corey? Right? You and I both know in the military that's a terrible question. There's one of two options:
Yeah.
they're either in jail or they're
They're in
dead,
jail or
or they're dead. And I'm like, nobody. What happened? He said Corey shot and killed himself last night. And I just, at that moment, I just looked at my rifle and I'm like, holy cow. If two guys from the same unit did that on the same night, it would devastate the unit. But I always say Corey saved my life. Unfortunately, it's when he took his own. So seeing how the memorial service affected all the soldiers, there was like, this can't be my way out because one, I don't want to give them permission to do the same thing. And then
yeah.
from that moment forward, I became, it was funny. Actually, it's not funny. I became the guy that when I saw something wrong with one of my soldiers, I would hand carry them down to mental health. I said, you're going to go talk to somebody. And it was like, oh, there's Sergeant Jarvis taking somebody else down to mental health, right? But what that did was that took away the responsibility for those soldiers to have to ask for help. But at the same token, I still wasn't willing to help myself. And that's the crazy part.
So you
So
were taking them down to mental health, but had you checked in with mental health yourself?
no, that's the thing is I was willing to take them to get them the help they needed, but I was still not willing, call it pride, call it whatever you want. I was still not willing to go talk to somebody myself. So I just continued doing life as usual. The big problem for me is when they moved me from a line infantry unit up to the S3, which is the operations. So I became a schools NCO. Now I'm behind a computer, right? And that's when the rabbit wheel just keeps going and going and going, and you're in your thoughts more. On the line, I'm busy, right? I'm distracted. I'm going out, I'm shooting, I'm doing the things that I'm trained to do. Putting me up behind a computer slowed me down to the point where I was in my thoughts constantly, and that was pretty detrimental. So I just kept charging on and moving until such time the United States Army said, "All right, you're officially going to be medically retired," and that was September 11th, of 2014. And I took one uniform off, and I went right back to another uniform. But the weirdest thing happened, and when I went back into law enforcement, I felt normal again. And I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, I got this. This is easy. This is the world I know, right? Not
Yeah.
realizing that cops, firefighters, paramedics, they operate in the fight or flight every single day that they work. So you feel normal. When you're not in that role, you feel like a fish out of water. And that's the problem. That's when we're in our thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation because we hear all the time that people were fine, and then it's when they transitioned out that stuff
Mm.
sort of started to hit them, and that the transition is hard, and they don't understand why they could go down range and fight the
Yeah.
enemy in Iraq and then come back, and it's dealing with the 9 to 5 job that's what gets to them. But
Yeah, transition's difficult. I mean, we transition about 20,000 service members every single month, right? That's a lot coming out.
yeah,
The most at risk for suicide is the first 18 months. Right? When they come out, they're separated from their tribe, right? They're no longer attached or affiliated with that unit. A lot of guys could just go to their buddies and, of course, drink beers and talk and have somebody that can understand them. And then you go into a civilian world and you got all these younger folks coming out. Now all of a sudden they're going to a college where somebody has a safe space, right? And
yeah,
that's something they can't relate to or understand because their safe space was a bunker in Afghanistan, right? Or
right.
or in a guard tower in Iraq, right? So relating to civilian population during transition is difficult. So yeah, that was pretty complex. But when I put the other uniform back on, everything was cool, right? It wasn't until I left law enforcement that everything came back with a vengeance, and that's because I slowed down. I was no longer operating in a fight or flight environment. And now I'm back to the nightmares, the night terrors, and the night sweats. And my ex-wife, we were married. We didn't get married until I was out of the military. and she's like, "What's going on?" She didn't experience the combat part of my world. She did experience law enforcement, and she's been in that sphere for quite a while. And she's like, "Well, what did you do?" And I'm like, "Are you sure you want to know?" And she's like, "Yeah, I want to know." And I'm like, so I shared some of the details, and she just had this look of like, "Oh my God, I don't know what to do with this." And that's when she's like, "You've either got to get help or I do." So I no longer had a security clearance, and I no longer had a badge to worry about. And that's the first time that I went down and sought help. And I think that's because I got to the point where I didn't want to destroy the relationship. I wanted to be better. I didn't want to feel that way anymore. And then going down the VA rabbit hole was interesting. I'm glad I did it, but my experience was, here, go fill this prescription. And then they do exposure therapy, which was horrendous. 60% of vets that do exposure will quit. They won't complete it because it's that intense. And I was one of the quitters. It's the first time I ever quit anything, but I don't say I quit. I think they quit on me. I did two
When you
sessions
say
with it.
exposure therapy, is that cognitive behavioral
It's a
talk
form.
therapy and they're kind of walking you through what happened, or
It's
what
a
is the
it's a
exposure therapy in this context?
So prolonged exposure, they call PE, is tell me about what happened that day from start until finish. So you're going back and recounting the story. And as you're
Mm.
recounting the story, you're activating your nervous system. You're engaging the fight or flight. You're feeling the emotions you felt at that moment. And it's weird. It's like you almost can smell the things that you smelt in the moment, because everything just comes back. And they just tell you keep telling that story, keep telling that story, keep telling that story. And you do that for an hour a day or an hour a session. And it's supposed to be for 12 weeks for one single event. So I did two appointments, and then I was getting ready to do my third, and the VA had canceled my third appointment. And I'm like, okay,
Go
well,
figure.
when can I get back and see the doctor? He goes, well, he doesn't have availability for 4 weeks. I'm like, crap. All right. I scheduled 4 weeks out. Meanwhile, that tourniquet was removed. All those emotions are out. And I mean, I had buried some things that I didn't really want to deal with. And so then I go back to that third appointment, and I think I did one or two more appointments. They called to cancel the next one. And I'm like, well, when can I get in to see the doc for the next one? He goes, well, he doesn't have availability for 8 weeks. And I'm like, holy cow. I said, and I'm like, I'm a retired sergeant first class. I'm college educated. I've been a police officer. I'm like, this is going to be tough. And then I was like, well, let me check my calendar and I'll get back to you. And that was it. I was done with the VA at that point. And that was in 2017. I'll give you one guess as to how many times they've called to check up on me.
Mm.
Zero.
Yeah.
So that was my VA experience. I learned what not to do. And for me, that was the exposure therapy, because it was just almost as bad as going through the events again from a nervous system perspective.
Yeah. And they wanted you to go through that about 12 times before it was supposed to numb or
It,
heal those
I think
nerves.
I think what they're trying to do is make you okay to be not okay kind of thing, like get used to it kind of thing. Because they did other things called in vivo exposure. They would be like, all right, go sit in your office for an hour every day and listen to taps. And those of us that have been downrange, when you're doing a ramp ceremony and you're watching your buddies being moved off for the last time, and then you go do the memorial service and they play taps, it's gut wrenching, right?
Yeah.
So they would do things like that, or even like, one of the things was, hey, go sit in a restaurant with your back to the door. And
Mm.
they're trying to let you know that you're going to be okay. They're exposing you to things that most
Yeah.
of and from a law enforcement perspective, sitting with your back to the door is a horrible idea anyway. And that was just the mode of treatment that they do. But yeah, that was no good. And this, not everybody's VA experience is different. I'm not trying to bash the VA. I'm just trying to say my experience with them was not a really healthy one. They're really good on like some medical stuff. If you need meds, or if you have to have your knee scoped, they got that. They've got that down pretty good.
Yeah.
It's the mental health side that they really struggle with.
No, I mean, I think they're one of the largest hospital networks in the country, if not the
Mhm.
largest hospital network in the country. And so some of the doctors are great. We've heard one of the issues is the doctor turnover. So once you develop that relationship with
Right.
your therapist or psychiatrist or whatever, and then they leave and somebody else comes in, and you've got to
Mhm.
essentially start. They say they're going to pick up the treatment where they left off, but you've got to fill this person in on where
Yeah.
you are and what happened. And
Mhm.
so I know a lot of people get frustrated on the mental health. And then on the medication side, from what we've heard, it seems like there's a lot of experimentation. I mean, and I don't mean
Mhm.
experimentation like they're,
What works, what doesn't
experimenting
work.
with drugs, but just, what works for you
Right.
might make somebody else catatonic. And
Mhm.
then, but you've got to give it a few months to figure out if it's actually therapeutic or not. And then they'll switch it to something else. And I think people get frustrated with that unless, and quit before they find the cocktail that works, if there is a cocktail that works for them.
Mhm.
So, okay. So you kind of stopped going to VA for a little while. And then how long until you discovered these alternative treatments for PTSD?
Yeah, so I just started looking for different things to do, right? Like I still wanted to get better. So I'm getting therapy. I'd left the sheriff's office. That's when everything came back, but we had EAP, and so I use EAP at the sheriff's office. And then I go through something called EMDR, which is eye movement desensitization reprocessing. Did about 6 sessions with that. Didn't care much for it. I was all over the place. It does well for some people, but I think it really depends on who the practitioner is. And then my wife, she was an administrator at the sheriff's office, so she was like major level, but on the civilian side, brought in a gentleman by the name of Scott Mann to do training for sergeants and above. And Scott's a retired lieutenant colonel, Green Beret, lives over in the Riverview area. And she kind of shared a little bit about my experience with him. And he's like, well, let's do dinner with him and his wife, Monty, and Gwinnell and myself. And of course, we go out to dinner, and it's the proverbial butt sniffing. I'm the E7. He's a lieutenant colonel, right? He's over there on the dark side, but he's a Green Beret, so he's at least cool in that regard. And we hit it off pretty good. And he invited me to do one of his leadership retreats in Tampa. And it was there that the idea to do 22-0 was first given. It was like Scott like literally stopped what he was doing teaching. And he's like, Dan, you look like you have something you want to say. And I'm like, yeah, 22-0. And he's like, well, what's that? I said, we're losing 22 veterans a day to suicide. We're going to take it to 0. Don't know how, but that's what the goal is. So just at that point, it was like I had a new mission and a new purpose, which that in itself kind of changed things, right? Because now I'm back on mission, right? That's one of the biggest things is when we disconnect from the military, we don't have a mission anymore. And you gotta,
Right.
if you're coming out of service, you got to get plugged in and do something. Got to get plugged in with an organization that you have a lot of respect for, that you enjoy working with, and you got to do something. And Viktor Frankl, who survived Auschwitz, right? He was a
Mhm.
psychiatrist. The man's search for meaning and helping others, we help ourselves. So just starting the new nonprofit was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And I had some really good people that were local to me here in Florida that joined the board. And a retired lieutenant colonel who was a Chinook pilot. He was on the board. Mark Newby, a friend of mine, Kim Manning. She was a retired lieutenant with the Polk County Sheriff's Office. My buddy Jeff Mesner, who's a business person, so we wanted somebody with some business sense. He's local here, and just started building a new organization. And we were looking for alternative ways to bring healing. And about 6 months after that weekend, I was invited to an event in Albuquerque, New Mexico, of all places. And
Hmm.
Dr. Frank Ochberg, he was the founder of the Research and Recognition Project. He's a clinical psychologist, brilliant guy. And they had developed a method called the Reconsolidation of Traumatic Memories Protocol. That's RTM. And it was the very first public training because they had already done all of their pilot studies. And they just started doing the training, and I'm in the back of the class, right? Or there's all mental health providers. It's like psychologists and therapists in this training. And they're talking about you can heal the PTS within 90% certainty, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, yeah, okay, BS, right? And day two
Yeah. I
comes
mean,
around,
we don't talk about healing PTSD. We talk about
treating it.
treating
Yeah.
PTSD usually.
Coping with your symptoms, managing your
Yeah.
symptoms, treating your symptoms. So I'm like, all right, if I have this nonprofit and I'm going to start recommending people to go through the protocol, I want to go through it. And that's what I told the instructor the next day. And he goes, oh, you want to do it in front of class when we come off break? So my cop brain was like, giddy up. I'm about to show this whole class of therapists that this guy's an idiot. He's a moron. And the method, what they do, it's kind of like a cognitive behavioral therapy sandwich. And in the very middle, there's a visual kinesthetic disassociation piece, right? And it's that part of it's rooted in a body of work called neurolinguistic programming. So I'm in the front of the room. There's 25 therapists. I don't know. I think I knew one person in the room. And that it's like, tell me about the event. And you tell the event until you trigger. And when the trigger hits, they get you out of it. They do what's called a break state. I remember feeling very uncomfortable. So it was a real world traumatic event, 0 to 10. It went to 10 like probably in about 15 seconds. And the
Oh.
guy broke the state. He got me out of it. didn't feel good. And then all of a sudden, something silly like a break state is, we had talked about trucks, right? Military guys, we love our trucks, but we're very brand loyal, right? And the guy goes, "Hey, what color is your Dodge truck?" And I stopped and I looked at him and I'm like, "Dodge? I wouldn't be caught dead driving a Dodge. I got a Ford." And then I realized I'm not even thinking about that event, and you're out of the emotion. And then they set this piece up in the middle where you're doing things like disassociating from the event, making images black and white, watching yourself third person, doing some things that are kind of odd, a little bit different to do. And they started that piece with a practice visual practice exercise, and then they go into the actual event. And then there's a part where there's like a rewind where you run the movie backwards, and then they have you talk about the event again. And all of a sudden, I stopped myself because I was waiting for the shoe to drop. And I looked at the guy and I'm like, what kind of Jedi stuff is this? Because I went from super intense to not feeling that trigger anymore. And then ended up having the best sleep of my life after that, because the brain then could relax. You could take the foot off the gas pedal. And I never forget, I went to Dr. Burke after that and I said, "Dr. Burke, why is this not available to everybody?" Right? And
Yeah.
he didn't really have an answer. He knew the answer. I know the answer now because, one, fixing a problem is not profitable, and the system doesn't believe that something like that could even exist. So it's like a breakthrough. It's something different. So I latched onto that organization. We were funding, like, every dollar we had coming in was to sponsor a therapist to get trained to do that so that we could send vets to them, and then problem we had with that
It's
is
just, I mean, they're just talking you through this. It's not, there's no drugs involved, there's no
no.
medication.
No, it's a very holistic way of addressing it, and it's like I said, it's the cognitive part on the front end, tell the story, and then, hey, what's your phone number backwards? All of a sudden, you're out of the feelings. That's all they're doing is activating it and letting the nervous system turn back off. Because once it's active, it's malleable. That's where the change happens. When the trigger's there, you can make some pretty good changes to it. And
It sounds a lot like dry needling for like the muscles, like where you stimulate the muscle and kind of
well,
get it to tense up, and then after it tenses up, it can release, or like
yeah, it's
from a
it's
cognitive perspective.
It's activation of the trigger, disassociation of the trigger, and then more disassociation, and then rewinding it, and then going into a positive state. And what you're doing is you're re-imprinting a positive emotion over the old one, and you'll
Wow.
see the expression of people like shifting. I'll give you an example. So, like, think about something that's mildly annoying to you. Can you do that? Nothing,
Yeah.
just something that annoys you. Can you feel that annoying feeling?
Yeah.
So now I want you to move out of that memory, and I want you to look at it like a drone looking down, so that you're a little tiny person, and get far enough away that you can't feel that. And let me know when you're far enough away you don't feel that.
Okay.
Okay? That's all you're doing is you're activating, you're disassociating. There's a little bit more
Yeah.
to it. It's a little bit more to it, but the way your body and brain have the way to work together to shut off that 10th cranial nerve, that vagus nerve, that's what's dumping all the chemicals into the body. That's what's making everything kind of feel yucky. The memory is not the problem. It's what we feel attached to that memory, because that's really what happens
Mhm.
with trauma. It's a survival mechanism. So it's kind of like when the hair on the back of your head stands up, like something's wrong. It's that part of the brain activating, and then it takes all of the data around that moment and it glues it to the memory, so that whenever you see something, hear something, smell something, taste something, the nervous system's like, oh, it's happening again. Go to safety, right? And the alarm gets turned on. That's the trigger, is the alarm. And it's a safety mechanism. It's like the Iraq war veteran coming home and swerving to miss a trash can because
Right.
the brain flips the switch and it's like, oh man, there's a possible IED threat, right? Same thing. Or
Yeah.
or to say, look at the civilian world, like maybe somebody had been sexually assaulted and a specific cologne was being worn, right? And then all of a sudden you're grocery shopping 10 years later, you smell that same cologne and your body goes, he's back, red alert, get to
Yeah.
safety. So when you actually shut those triggers down, you're now giving your brain new stimuli to respond to. So the nervous system is electricity in your body. Energy and motion is emotion. So now we know how to disconnect it. Now we know how to change the patterns. Now we know how to resolve the trauma. Like for us, we do it a little bit differently. When COVID hit, the problem we ran into was we didn't have any more money coming in. And then with the clinical world, we were restricted to geography. So there was maybe 50 of these therapists nationwide, right? But if you were in Alaska and there was nobody trained in Alaska, therapists can't work with you. If you're in Hawaii
Right.
and there's nobody in Hawaii, therapists can't work with you. If you could be in the middle of the United States, Florida, we had a bunch here. New Mexico had a bunch. That was really it. So, but even then, telehealth wasn't even a thing. So you had to physically get to the therapist to do the work. And that became problematic and, cost prohibitive. And it was, and they were hell bent, no telehealth before COVID. So before COVID,
Right.
we had a veteran in Pennsylvania who had 6 kids, lived with his girlfriend, and we were trying to get him to Florida. We were going to fly him to Florida, put him in a hotel, do everything, and and we've done that. We brought people to Florida. That was part of what we did, so that we had therapists here to do it. And we lost the guy to suicide because we couldn't get him to Florida. And that's like, why in the
That's
world?
so frustrating. I mean, it's
Yeah,
tragic, but it's like you're so close and
you have an out, you have a solution, you have a way to make this person's life better. They don't fully understand that, because if you have somebody that
right.
has full blown PTSD, they've been dealing with it sometimes their whole life, right? If all of a sudden somebody comes in and says, "Hey, we can heal it now," believing it is difficult. So you have to get past that critical faculty
Yeah.
between the conscious and the unconscious brain, which is why it's so important for us. When COVID happened, the money dried up, and then we found a lot of the therapists that were trained weren't even using it because it's a 90-minute model and the therapy model is 50 minutes, so they couldn't even do the protocol. So I'm like, well, what do we do? So
Right.
we just I went down the rabbit hole and developed the trauma resiliency protocol, right? So TRP, we can do this from a non-narrative, non-clinical perspective. And right now, TRP, the peer rescue version, is a non-line process. And we're doing university level research on it with QEEG brain mapping. So Evoke Neuroscience developed the QEEG that we use, which is an 18 channel cap that measures the electricity, so you can see what PTSD looks like. You can see, there's classic versions of it, and the brain looks different for PTSD, looks different for some people, but there's a classic one where you see the back of the brain, which is where the fight or flight mechanism is, the amygdala will activate on one of the tests that they do. And then over a course of 2 or 3 sessions, you can see the brain actually recovering and healing, going back to green baseline. And their scores
Wow.
dropping to zero or near zero. And that's, our goal is to get it to become an evidence-based practice so that the clinical world will look at it, because reality is it's their responsibility to address issues like PTS. But if they're not willing to try something different, we have to force change, and it's going to come from the outside. So
Has, have you presented any of this to VA? Have any of the VA practitioners started looking into it?
So my experience with the VA, we did apply for. They had a $3 million grant back when I was with 220. We applied for it. We had a solution for it. Dr. David Hagedorn, who did the brain scan, who developed that technology, he's a clinical psychologist and a neuroscientist. Within 30 minutes, he could look at the brain and see a person that he goes, all right, that person's suicidal because that part of the brain's active. We were both rejected. We were both rejected the first round. The organization that was awarded the grant, what they did was forensic audits of social media. Well, they're already gone at that point. I I don't think the VA really wants to correct the problem, because the VA's done research with RTM against exposure therapy, and it took them forever to publish the data. I think active military units are starting to train their therapists to do it, but the VA's,
Hmm.
look how long it took the VA to do EMDR. They're now doing EMDR. They've done it
Yeah.
for the last 2 years, and that's been around since early 1980s. So that's the frustrating part. I know once the evidence is out there, I think they're going to be forced to look at it differently. But
I would think so because they're not a for-profit organization. So if they can cure veterans in one session or two sessions or
right.
and
Well,
not have to have ongoing care, I mean, that would allow them to focus their resources on other things.
one would think, and that, I mean,
Logically.
logically that would make sense. But when you're dealing with clinical psychologists with PhDs or PsyDs at high levels, and some guy with no PhD, no LPC, no LCSW, no clinical background is bringing something to the forefront, they look at you like you got something growing out of the middle of your forehead. So many of them won't even. So like when we got rejected, of course, I made a post, I made a comment about it, and then a VA psychologist chimed in, and he was on the committee. And so we started talking, and I'm like, look, he dealt with veterans with PTSD and substance use disorder, right? And he was out in Texas. And I'm like, look, I'll fly to you. I'll take care of my own lodging. and you and I can sit down with your worst case and I'll show you how it works. Put up or shut up, right? And he immediately disconnected any communication with us. So that's what we run into with the VA is I think it's a disbelief or the cognitive dissonance component.
Yeah, I mean, and I get that they don't want to do experimental treatments on people who haven't signed up for experimental treatments if if the data isn't behind it. I applaud that piece, but at the same time, if you're shutting down evidence-based treatment protocols, and I think they are looking into some of like the psilocybin or the
Right, but I
ketamine treatments and like, some of the more extreme drug-based therapies.
well, but you also got to look at the way that's going to measure out. So the whole psilocybin that's already been through phase 3 clinical trials. They're doing it, they're bringing in the ibogaine. The only way that that's going to pass is these drug companies are going to create a synthetic equivalent and they're going to
Mm,
market it for sale. You can't put a patent on psilocybin. You can't put a patent on
right.
ibogaine because it's a natural occurring substance. So that's the problem is the big pharma model, I think, is the biggest roadblock to successful methodologies because they're the ones writing the checks. They're the ones that are making the profits. They're the ones funding congressional campaigns.
Yeah.
I think it just comes down to dollars.
So veterans probably can't ask for this kind of therapy through the VA.
Correct.
So are you guys the only ones providing it, or should they reach out to you? Is that, or if
Yep.
they want to get more information, what's
Yeah.
the next step for veterans who are listening to this and saying, "Hey, this sounds like something I've tried everything else," or
Right.
"I haven't tried anything yet because it all sounds like it's not going to work for me, but I want to try this."
Yeah. So Healing the Hero, all they got to do is go to healingthehero.org. There's a blue button that says Heal Here. Push the button, fill out your information. Tammy's our case manager. She and I are the ones that get those emails, and we respond usually within 15 or 20 minutes. And then Tammy will set up a time to see how high their stress loads are, put them with a peer coach, right? And here's the really good part about what we do. It's non-clinical, it's non-narrative, right? We won't let them talk about their trauma. And we don't have the correct initials to say a person does or does not have PTSD. So there's no worry about losing a benefit, right? All
Hmm.
our only goal is to help them sleep and not put a gun in their mouth. And if we can do that, they can tell the VA whatever the heck they want.
And is it all? Do you operate entirely on donation based? Or because people are saying, "Okay, if I'm not getting my care from VA, do I have to come
Yeah.
up with money for this treatment?" Or
There's zero cost for treatment for any hero, right? And not just the hero, but their spouse and their kids. And the youngest child that we've ever worked with is 4 years old. So
wow,
think about it. Think about that for a second. A 4-year-old child living in a traumatic environment, no longer living in a traumatic environment, that child's whole future just changed, right? But
yeah,
if you're a veteran with PTS and they're married, I guarantee you the spouse is dealing with it too. So you have to heal the group together, right? Your family unit really should come through and heal together. And there's zero cost. We have mil spouses that are coaches. We have veterans that are coaches. We have cops that are coaches. We have firefighters that are coaches. Some are both. And all they do is usually 2 to 3 sessions and they're done. And then they just go back and live life like they're supposed to. We're trying to work our way out of a job.
you said, I think on one of the other videos I saw you on, you said you do ask one thing for people who go through the program.
Yep. Send us your buddies. Send us your buddies. One of the guys says, "What is this going to cost me?" I'm like, "It isn't going to cost you anything." And he's like, "No, nothing's free. What's it going to cost me?" I said, "All right, you got me. Send me your buddies." He says, "I can do that." Right. Because it's been a grassroots and it's always been, "Hey, my buddy went through this. He's recommending." Or my wife went through this. She's recommending. Or I heard about this on a podcast. And then actually, I have a guy in he does fly fishing up in Jordan. He's probably sent 100 people because he fishes with
Wow,
vets. I have a buddy who does
that's awesome.
take a vet fishing over in the Sarasota area. He's also got Operation Healing Heroes that's on Discovery Channel, and he's constantly sending us people. And we want to partner with other nonprofits, not in a competitive way, but in a supporting way, right? How can we help if you deal with people that are PTS focused, send us those that are wounded, let us heal them up, and then they can go back and go through whatever it is you're doing with them, whether it's fishing or equine, and because it's a whole total approach, right? There's no silver bullet. Just a continuum of care, right? We're just one
Right.
part of that. We're just one part of that, right? We are one piece of the equation, and it's a big equation. When the 800-pound gorilla is gone, which is the PTS, we do a lot of times recommend them. Okay, now you can go do your cognitive work because you can talk about what happened and not have the nervous response.
Right.
So that's the big partnership is critical because we have to lock shields, not stiff arm each other. We have to work together. We have to.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think sometimes people are, I mean, people just have these stigmas around
Mhm.
PTSD, whether that's, they're, I mean, I've talked to people who don't even realize they have it. And then
Right.
there's so many people, finally, they get into some kind of therapy and they're like, oh, that's why I've been acting that way. And
Mhm.
I've had this many failed marriages, or my kids don't talk to me, or,
The moment you go into lizard brain where your amygdala, the back of the brain activates, you're shutting off prefrontal cortex. That's where your impulse control is. That's where logic and
mm,
decision making, and that's where your empathy centers are. So when I address veterans, and how many of you guys have said something to the person you love the most, and 5 minutes later we're like, "Oh my god, I can't believe I said that." That's just because of the limbic hijack. The nervous system kicked on. They lost empathy briefly, but they lost empathy.
yeah. So they can come to you if they're just struggling in life, whether or not they have a
Mhm.
diagnosis of
Yeah.
PTSD, whether or not they've sought other treatments beforehand, right?
Yep, and they can come even while they're doing treatment of other types. We don't want to interfere with somebody's cognitive work, but I always say the cognitive work is the heavy lifting. What we do is simple, right? It takes us 4 to 6 minutes to decouple emotions from a trauma, and we just go right down the path. And you might process 10 to 12 memories in a single session, and we just do one at a time. And the next thing you know, you're sleeping like a rock, right? And that's what we have to get you in is sleep, because sleep is where the brain reconsolidates memories. If you're hitting REM cycles, that's where the brain is designed to move. All right, I'm going to put the memory over here. I'm going to put the emotions over there. You're still going to have access to those emotions, just not in those root memories.
Yeah, we have so many veterans that have both PTSD and sleep apnea, and
Mhm.
there's a lot of research about why the two are connected, and whether it's neurochemical or weight
Well,
gain is a intermediary factor, whatever. But if you're not sleeping and you're dealing with PTSD, it's a cycle. They aggravate each other.
yeah, that's the compounding health impacts of PTS, right? Whenever you're operating in a fight or flight response, you have high cortisol levels, high adrenaline levels. So you get adrenal fatigue and you get high cortisol. It'll shut down your metabolism, because when you go into that survival mode, it says, "All right, I need all of these calories to live." And next thing you know, if you can get the cortisol levels to drop, the weight will start coming off. I have a friend right now who's a therapist and did the work, and all of a sudden she's like, in a week, I'm down 6 pounds, and she's excited, right? And so, yeah, because you finally turn your cortisol level back to normal. I had a police officer and a vet I met in Orlando a couple years back. I did a session with him, just one, at a conference at the Florida Association of Hospital Negotiators, and I saw him the next year, and he was 70 pounds lighter. And I'm like, dude, man,
Wow.
you look great. What'd you do different? He goes, I didn't do anything different, right? Just from turning the cortisol level off. Like, this is why you see
Wow.
a lot of obese police officers. It's just stress, and then some people eat their stress
Yeah.
or drink their stress. So, but it's cool to be able to see somebody transform very quickly. It's not, it sounds too good to be true. It sounds like snake oil. I get that part.
It does. When I first heard you talk,
Yeah.
and I think one of the videos I watched, you didn't really even talk. It kind of cut through the like what they did in the session. You're like, and then I
Mhm.
went and they did their stuff, and then it was like, whoa, and you're like, okay, come on, can this be
No,
real?
that's why when I did that live demo in front of the therapist, I'm like, I'm going to prove that this guy's wrong. And he's not wrong. He was 100% right. Right. So we just do it from a peer to peer perspective, because you have to trust the people you work with. All I have to do is gain your
Mhm.
trust. If you trust me, all I need you to do is suspend reality. Just follow the instructions, flow through it. Let's see what happens. Right. What do you have to lose? There's nothing to lose. You can't make somebody worse, right? By having them. Next thing you know, it's funny because when I get an analytical, like a super intelligent analytical thinker, they always have this utter look of confusion, because they're always trying to be in control of the situation. And they're like, what did you just do? Right. All we did is, and it's just the process, right? You're driving a car and we're holding a roadmap, and we're telling your brain what to do and how to do it. And the next thing you know, what was very intense, you can't feel anymore. It's just the emotions have changed. And that's all we're doing is changing the state. We're not changing the memory.
Yeah, I think that sounds amazing. When you say that there's no risk, I mean, it really sounds like there is no risk with this one. When you hear about treatments or alternative treatments that people talk about that aren't available in the US, you have to go down to Mexico, and then they're
Mhm.
going to have some practitioner administer some drugs that aren't FDA approved.
Right.
And you've got people that have major success stories with that. But if it's, to me, I'm the analytical type. I'm the
Yep.
type that's like, what could go wrong? What are their credentials? What happens if the body doesn't react the right way? What happens if they dose more than they're supposed to, or, that stuff scares me, but just being able to
Well,
talk through the stuff. I mean, I guess that's scary too if you're unpacking some trauma, but
the thing is, that's why we're doing studies. So Arizona State's already published a pilot study with 128 police officers from my first nonprofit. They're about to publish another study with veterans. We're doing a study with them with a brain mapping. So before and after, you can see what the brain looks like. So that's objective data on top of their subjective scores. Scoring is important. So like if their PCL goes from 72 to 0, that's important because that means they're
right.
feeling different. But when you add the objective component of physical evidence, like there's the brain scan with PTS, and there's the brain scan without it. There's the heart rate variability with PTS, and there's a heart rate variability without it. There's an objective measurement of data, and that's the stuff that they're not going to be able to say, well, that's just placebo, or in the clinical world they call it flight to help. It's not that. You're seeing the brain changing. Something's happening inside of the brain. As far as what it is, I guess our next study would probably be fMRI, because that would be the next level. But we got to change the way the system functions, right? Because
Yeah.
I'm losing more buddies stateside here to suicide than we lost overseas.
Yeah.
So our battalion, we just lost our company, we lost 2 in combat, and an infantry company, we've had people associated with that company, about 7 suicides. And
Wow.
these are people that some of them I had talked to, but one of the guys was like, well, I'm doing the VA, I'm with the therapist, and then he checks out, it's something's got to change.
Yeah. No, something's definitely got to change. Well, I'm really grateful for the work that you're doing, and I know our listeners are really grateful for the work that you're doing. And we're going to put your contact information, or the website and how to get in touch with Healing the Hero in the comment section here in the show notes. Do you have any final thoughts you want to share with listeners?
I would just tell you, if you're sitting on the fence, you're not alone, right? There's a lot of people right now that is sitting on that fence trying to figure out what to do. All you could do is spend a little bit of time. Let's just explore what could happen and just see what that future might look like. What would it look like to be healthy again? What would it look like to not get triggered when you're driving a car, or get angry at your spouse or your kids? So you owe it at least for your kids, but you owe it for yourself. You deserve to heal.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan. And thanks everyone for tuning in. And we will see you next time.